And he said podcasting, and I ran to a computer, I typed in podcasting, and there was 1.5 pages. Started back in 2005 when we would chisel, podcasts out of stone, basically.
What got you into podcasting to start with, that chisel and hammer?
The light bulb really went off. I was like, oh, I see what this is.
Could you talk about the listener experience and why Podpage can really elevate the listener experience as a part of the audience?
One of the things we're always doing is reinforcing your brand.
This is Tom Fox, and welcome to the latest edition to the Compliance Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and you're in for an Uber treat today because I'm in for an Uber treat because I'm absolutely thrilled to have Dave Jackson with me. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Tom, happy to be here.
Dave, I think it's fair to say you're definitely one of the OGs of podcasting. Could you maybe just briefly highlight that history up to what you're doing today?
Yeah, it started back in 2005 when we would chisel, podcasts out of stone, basically. And that's when I launched the School of Podcasting. Along the way, boy, I've been the head of the New Media Expo, which before there was podcast movement, there was that. Was the head of podcasting over at Libsyn for 8 years. Currently, I'm the head of podcasting at Podpage. And let's see what else happened along the way there. 2018, I got inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame, and I got a book deal and wrote the book Profit from Your Podcast. So I'll stop there. I think that's enough.
Well, maybe with that history, could I just ask the question, what got you into podcasting to start with that chisel and hammer?
It's a case where I had just seen so many things as the internet was growing that I'd be like, ooh, I should have jumped on that. And then another one and another one. And a friend of mine came back from this big marketing conference and he said, hey, I've seen the next big thing. I go, what is it? And he said, podcasting. And I ran to a computer, I typed in podcasting, and there was 1.5 pages. And I was like, how do you spell this again? He's like, it's casting. And I'm like, dude, I think we broke the internet. There's only, like 1 page of stuff. And so when I finally, pieces parted one together and I uploaded a file and saw it come back down in my software, and the light bulb really went off. I was like, oh, I see what this is. And it was just a case where I'm like, this is not going to be yet another thing that I go, oh, I should probably jump on this. And then I didn't. And I was like, I'm taking action on this. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to jump in. And then once I started, the thing that really cemented it is my first podcast was actually for musicians. And I got a voicemail from Michael Van Laar from Nuremberg, Germany. And I'm in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. And I got some guy in Germany not only found my show, but liked it. And I just grabbed my flag and I'm like, I hereby claim podcasting in the name of Dave. And that got me going.
So I play in two worlds, podcasting, and then the other world is called legal and regulatory compliance.
Yeah.
And I've been in that space for about 20 years, and I saw an explosion of growth. I saw a huge number of startup vendors. I saw consolidation of those vendors into 4 unicorns and a maturing of that legal practice area into 2025. So I've seen that evolution, and I use that as a way to introduce a question of what have you seen in the evolution of podcasting, both in terms of the actual podcasting and podcasters, but also those who support podcasting from the vendor side?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Apple added podcasting to, back then it was iTunes, and it was just, it was an actual hockey stick growth. Everybody saw their numbers go through the roof. So that was really interesting. And then just over the years, there have been all these little ad agencies and networks and such. And every now and then you'll hear where, oh, this agency bought that agency. And, I remember Pandora, was purchased by Sirius, so you always have these little consolidations. And so it's interesting to see. And now the thing that everybody's talking about is all the AI tools. And I always think, okay, these all can't exist forever. Eventually somebody's going to buy this one or that one or something like that. I could be wrong, but it's been fun because it went from, the early podcasters were all nerds because you had to be kind of a geek or a nerd to get one up and going. And over the years, it's just been easier and easier. I mean, I don't know where mine went, but a PodTrack P4 is less than $200. And if we go back, say 5 years ago, this little gizmo, and if we go back 5 years, this would have been $1,000. because they just, it was just one of those where it was this hyper niche kind of thing. And then Zoom was like, wait a minute, there are enough of these people. We can make a product just for them. And this thing's amazing. And so it's just gotten easier as time has gone on.
So, what are some of the misconceptions you have seen over the years around podcast success?
Yeah, well, number one, the word success, because that means I always say, I had somebody once that said, "Hey, I need help starting a podcast," and I'm like, "Great, like, what's it going to be about?" And he said, "Batman," and he said, "I can feel you rolling your eyes. I know there's already, 30 shows out there about Batman." He goes, "But my family is tired of hearing me talk about Batman, so I got to find other people to do this." And I said, "Okay, like, why else are we doing this?" He goes, "That's it." And so when he released his first episode, I go, "Congratulations, your show is a huge success." And he's like, "I got 13 downloads or whatever it was." And I go, "No." I go, "Your goal was to talk about Batman." I go, "You are talking about Batman." So you have to define your success. And a lot of people only make it to about episode 7 or 8 because they think, especially when I worked at Libsyn, I'd see these people with 5,000 people on Instagram, and then they would start a podcast and they would get, maybe 900 downloads. And they're like, something must be wrong with your stats. And I'm like, nope, getting people to jump from one platform to another is not easy. And I think, I mean, who doesn't want to make money quickly? But that's just not the case. I always, when I wrote my book and I interviewed all these people that were making money with their podcast, and I would say, how long did it take you to make a little more than Mountain Dew money? And they all said 3 years. And, maybe they'd say 2 to 3 years, but it was never 6 months or 6 weeks or a year. It takes a while. And I always say you don't monetize a podcast, you monetize an audience. And so, there are other reasons. Like, I was talking to someone last week and I was speaking in Chicago, and their entire goal of the podcast is to simply grow their network. And podcasting is great for that. People that would never give you the time of day, you say, "Hey, how would you like to come on my podcast and share your awesome knowledge?" They'll jump all over that. So there's a lot of different definitions of success, but I think the one that I hear the most is, well, there are things like, you can make money from day one. Okay, that's not a lie, but when they say make money from day one, they're talking about 0.005 cents a download. And if you only get 30 downloads, that's, not enough for a cracker or a piece of gum. So that's one. And then just people saying, "I can get you to the top of the charts." And to which I always say, "Great. Could you name me a season 6 winner of American Idol?" And they go, "What?" And I go, "Who was the season 6 winner of American Idol?" And they go, "I have no idea." I go, "Exactly." I go, "There are people that can do all sorts of not always ethical ways of getting you more downloads, but even if those are real people, and many times they're not, just getting in front of people, you have to have the skills to hold their attention and make them come back."
So, let's turn to Podpage, and
Mhm.
I'm going to introduce this topic with the following. Uh, in a prior life, I was a software lawyer,
Hmm.
and this was early 2000s. And if someone had something worthwhile to see, you would open with, "This is really cool stuff." Although I didn't use the word stuff, but I run a PG podcast. And that's what I felt like when I saw Podpage the first time. I would went, "Wow, this is really cool." And I don't know if that's what got you to Podpage, but tell us your journey to Podpage and really how you can use Podpage to build a podcast brand.
Yeah, over back in 2020, Brennan Mulligan is the founder of Podpage, and he hired me as a podcast consultant to say, "Hey, I've got this idea to build websites for podcasters." And I was like, "Well, we'd need at minimum our about page, a contact page, and our episodes." And he came back in a couple days and was like this, and I was like, "That is amazing." And so over the years, I would be like, "Could you get it to do this? Can you get it to integrate with Patreon and PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee? And we need to integrate it with newsletters and things like that." And over the years, he just kept adding more stuff. And so we've always kept in touch. And last year, he contacted me. He said, "Hey, I have a position over here." And he goes, "You almost work for me anyway, because I made a free course for people to learn Podpage. I'm just a huge fan." And he said, "I have this position. It's part customer service, part training, part this." And everything he named, I was like, "Ooh, I love that." And there's nothing wrong with Libsyn, but everything that Brendan said, I was like, "Ooh, I want to do more of that." And the beauty of it is podcasters want to talk into a mic, and that's about it. And that's really the beautiful part of Podpage is we make great looking websites for people that don't want to learn how to code. So you just take your RSS feed from whoever you're hosting with, Captivator, Libsyn, or Buzzsprout, or whoever. You put that in there, and all that information that normally goes to apps now goes to Podpage, and we just turn it into a really great working website where you can go in and, like I said, you can tie in your email list. You can we have a great survey built into it because the one thing we want people to do is be successful. And a lot of times people were always saying, I'm not really sure if my audience even likes my show. And I'm like, well, here's a way to find out. Just go ask them with this survey. So it's a great way. And it's kind of a bummer because I still have two sites on WordPress because I'm a consultant. I have to keep kind of my toe in the WordPress water. But every time I go over there, I'm like, oh, I hate this thing, and there's 8 million WordPress plugins, and I've got to pay WordFence every year to make sure it doesn't get hacked and all sorts of other things. So yeah, it's and Brendan really built it the way I say to build a podcast, which is find out what your audience wants and give it to them. And he's kind of done that over the last 5 years. And it's really one of those things. Like I said, I was in Chicago, and while I was talking, somebody went to Podpage, and at the end of the event, they go, you just made 20 versions of my website. I go, yeah, those are all templates. You can start there and tweak away. And he goes, he goes, it already looks better than my current website. So our whole thing is we know we have a great product. We just need people to go to, podpage.com/preview and go check out what your website would look like on Podpage. So that's the thing. That's our mission right now. It's just to let everybody know it exists.
Let me focus on the word audience because for Podpage, I'm the audience, I'm the podcaster, but there's another audience, that's the listener. Could you talk about the listener experience and why Podpage can really elevate the listener experience as a part of the audience?
Yeah, one of the things we're always doing is reinforcing your brand. So, for instance, I hear a lot of podcasters say, find me wherever you find your podcast. And I have a single tear come out of my eye when that happens because working at Libsyn, I know that's the last thing you want to say. You'll send them over to Spotify, they'll do a search. I have a video on my YouTube channel where I type in the exact name of the show and it doesn't show up in search. Well, with Podpage, you go in and you put your link to Apple and Spotify and however many other apps you want there. And then you can just tell people, go to mywebsite.com/follow, and there's the links. And that way you're putting the choice in the audience's hand. Because a lot of people don't realize we all love our Apple here in the States, but 70% of Europe is on an Android phone. And so it reinforces your brand. It makes it easy to remember. It's just the website/follow and then the audience gets to pick, and there are all sorts of things there that and we make it easy to sign up for a newsletter, or the survey I mentioned is /survey, and then you can make your own. And so if this was episode 84, I know it's your website.com/84 so that you can then say that in your show, and that's just a link we make automatically based on you putting the episode number into your media host. So it's all about reinforcing your brand. Same thing with sponsors. We make those follow pages for the apps, but if you have sponsors, we make one page with all of your sponsors on it so that when you say, oh yeah, you can get a deal on this great product, just go to mywebsite.com/sponsor, and they might go over there for sponsor number one, but they didn't know you had sponsor number two and number three, and they might actually buy something from those other sponsors. So the goal there is, right, we're sending more traffic to the sponsor, so they're happy. It's an easy to remember link again, and the audience only has to remember one link. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Let me turn to the business side of podcasting. And what have you seen as some of the successful strategies for persons who want to monetize their podcast?
Yeah, the one I always recommend that's by far the most profitable is selling your own products or services. So using your podcast as a marketing arm, and it also then positions yourself as kind of an expert in the field. So that's one. Like for example, the book behind me, I think if you buy one, I think I make $12. Well, if I was selling advertising and that advertising again was 5 cents per 1,000 downloads, I'd have to have 2,400 downloads. And I go, what's easier, selling one book or getting 2,400 downloads? So I always like selling my own stuff, but there are people that are absolutely crushing it on crowdfunding. So the Patreons and Supercasts of the world. There are affiliate. I've made decent money with affiliates, and it's all about knowing who your audience is and what product will fit them. I remember I had a weight loss show, and I promoted the Total Gym because Christy Brinkley and Chuck Norris were just on TV nonstop, and I was like, well, I'm going to ride their coattails. The bad news is that didn't really fit my audience, and so I sold one. I made I think $75 for the commission on that, and then I found these things called fit decks, and they were actually decks of cards, and I bought one and was playing with it, and I said, you know, this could be a fun game. You could just turn this into a game with your kids. And I had no idea, but that was the phrase that pays, because I also found out that most of my audience was female and they had children. And I made like $1.50 every time somebody bought a deck of cards, but they were buying multiple decks because there were like, fit decks for pregnant people and fit decks for this and that and that. And I was just constantly getting these emails. You just earned $4.50. You did this, you did that. And I remember getting, not going to retire on it, but 3-figure affiliate income just for mentioning one product. And so when you have multiple products that all resonate with the audience, affiliate marketing can also really add up. And it's usually not what one strategy should I use. It's like use them all, and more hoses going into the pool are going to fill up the pool faster. So use them all.
I was on a call yesterday with someone from a PR agency, and they proposed to me something that I'd never heard, and it was the following. We want to pay, I have an appearance fee on one podcast, and we want to pay the appearance fee, but we do not want to tell our client.
Oh,
And I said, well, you can do that. The problem is I have to announce that this is a paid appearance
right.
on either the show notes or more appropriately on the podcast. And they're like, you have to do that? And I said, yes, I have to do that. So what are some of the ethics around podcasting? Is it disclosure, transparency, or is there something more?
Yeah, that's our good friends at the FTC. You have to disclose that you got paid. That's why if you listen on the radio, they'll say like the following program is a paid sponsorship by Dr. Tim or whatever. And then Dr. Tim comes on. And so, yeah, you have to disclose that. Kim Kardashian got in some trouble because she kept holding up things on Instagram and saying, oh, I love this stuff, and not saying, oh, by the way, they paid me to hold this up. So you have to disclose that. And you have to do it at the beginning of the show. You can't wait till the end and go, oh, by the way. So that's that. And for me, the true, just the benefit of interview shows are the relationships you build with people. Because I'm always worried that even if you disclose it and you get X amount of money, and at first when you do it, like, hey, wow, look, we have extra money. And then I don't know about you, but anytime I have extra money, fast forward 6 months and you've got a pool payment and little Susie's braces, and all of a sudden that extra money isn't so extra. And then what happens? Well, now you got to take anybody with a pulse that has money to be on your show, which means you're probably not delivering the best value to the audience. So you lose your audience, and that's what people are willing to pay for. So I've never been a fan of paying to get on a podcast. That just doesn't work for me. And when I on my book, when I was interviewing people, they all said the same thing, that before they had a sponsor come on, they had the sponsor send them the product. And they said if they wouldn't use it, they would go, yeah, I'm not going to say this is the best product ever and everybody should buy one if I don't believe that, because we all start with two things. We start with no audience and integrity. And the idea is to build your audience while keeping your integrity. He goes, because if somebody buys this and they go, oh, this thing was horrible, it didn't even last, and it was, didn't do the job or whatever. He goes, the next time you have a sponsorship ad and you say, oh, you should buy this, it's great. He goes, they're not going to believe you. So everyone I talked to that was doing sponsorships, they said, yeah, we have to use the product first. So as much as it's a sponsorship and not an endorsement, it kind of is an endorsement, whether you want it to be one or not. And so that's another thing I would recommend. Never promote something that you wouldn't use.
Two women who came on my compliance podcast network started a podcast called Great Women in Compliance. And the most brilliant thing they did was they created a LinkedIn community called Great Women in Compliance. And this was 2018. And they tapped into an entire market of women in the corporate world. And it really showed me the power of community, but to stop thinking about podcasting in and of itself, and maybe thinking broader about community. And so I was wondering is how would you counsel someone to use or create a community to deepen the listener connection and experience?
Yeah, the thing I definitely don't recommend anymore is using, Facebook, LinkedIn, all these social places. And I get it, it's free and people are already there. But I had a guy on my show a couple months ago, 86,000 people in his Facebook group, and it was gone like that. And the answer was, you, you broke our terms of service. And he's like, what did we do? Like, and they won't tell you, and there's no appeal. You just lost, 86,000 people. So I'm always like, go get Heartbeat or Circle or something. And yes, they're not free, but you can have your people chime in. Now, the interesting thing is people go, well, yeah, but I go into my Facebook and I've got, thousands and thousands of people. And I go, great. How many people did your last post reach? And the answer is next to none. I mean, I run a community on Facebook for Podpage, and it's just dismal. I will post something and I can see how many people actually saw it. And that's because it's really easy to drive by a group in Facebook and go, oh, yeah, that sounds good. And you click on it and you never go back. And if you don't believe me, when you're bored, go into Facebook and look at groups and see how many you've actually joined and you never went back. So I would rather have a smaller group with truly engaged people than have a, Facebook or LinkedIn or whoever with thousands of people and nobody's paying attention. But the great thing about that community is these are people that have said, I want this content. And so these are the people you can do polls. You can, same thing with a newsletter. These are people that have taken an extra step. And so when you're wondering, I just did an episode about staying married and being a podcaster. And it wasn't really about growing downloads or gear or bandwidth or anything like that. But I asked about 6 or 7 people and they go, oh, I would listen to that. And so you need that feedback mechanism. And that's really where communities, whether it's a Facebook group or a newsletter, can really come in handy.
One theme I've garnered throughout this podcast is you're a mentor, you're a coach, you're a teacher, you're an educator, you're a communicator. So let me turn to maybe asking a little bit about that part of your personality.
Sure.
So what are some of the things that have been rewarding to you in that role?
Um, just I don't have any kids, so you always kind of wonder like what your legacy is going to be in a way. And I was just listening to Scott Johnson does a show called "What Was That Like." It's a really interesting show where he interviews people that have like the one guy got attacked by a grizzly bear who just mauled him, and the guy lived through it. And I was listening to Scott being interviewed on another show, and he mentioned how he had heard me tell a story on a show I do called Building a Better Dave. And I was talking about how I had to put my dog down. And he goes, I really gave this play by play. And he goes, I was amazed at how that affected him, how it made him feel. And he goes, and that's when he realized how storytelling really is so powerful. And that's what inspired him then to launch What Was That Like? So when you kind of hear that, a little bit of my fingerprints are on that, uh, there's that. And then I remember I had a woman, Marcy Rosenbaum. I never will forget her. She called me up and said, I want to start a podcast, but I hate technology and I'm never going to be able to do it. And I said, okay, yes, we can. I said, I'm going to walk you through it bit by bit. It'll be fine. And when I finally got her and I walked her through submitting her show to Apple, she called me the next day crying. And I'm like, Marcy, what's wrong? And she said, I'm in iTunes. And I go, yeah, we did that yesterday. She goes, no, I'm in iTunes. And I go, yeah. And she goes, no, you don't get it. She goes, I called you. I said I couldn't do it. You said I could. And I said, no, I can't. And you said, yes, you can. And I'm in iTunes. So that puts a lot of gas in my tank. The fact that, somebody's like, nobody would ever listen to me. And then it's always funny because they think that, and then they get excited because they're like, holy cow, I just went over 100 downloads. And then they actually switch. They're like, holy cow, people are actually listening to me. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that great? And then they kind of get a little freaked out. So I love having people that they're just stuck on something. And most of the problems with podcasting, it's not the gear, it's not the microphone, it's the brain. It's up here. That's what's stopping us from getting up and pressing record. So that's always fun when I can get somebody over that hump.
For some reason, unlike any other business or profession I've ever been in, I feel like I have never made a mistake in podcasting, save one that I will say at the end, but everything I've done has been a learning experience. And so I try to communicate, you know, it's difficult for me to watch or listen to my first couple of podcasts,
Oh yeah.
but nevertheless, I learn, don't do this, do that, do something different. That didn't work. Try something different. So, what are some of the maybe common pitfalls or challenges um, podcasters face, and how do you help them get through those early challenges?
Yeah, I had a guy that, if I remember right, it's Tales from the Cockpit, I believe is the name of his show. And he was a pilot that flew in Afghanistan. He had a book and he was a keynote speaker, and I could not get him to record his first episode. And I said, "Look, you've obviously, you're brave. You have content. You know how to talk. Like, what's the deal?" And he said, "I think it's my military background." And he goes, "I think I'm just afraid of looking stupid." I go, "Well, it's not live radio." I go, "The only way you're going to sound stupid is if you put this out the way it is." And he was like, I said, "Do you trust me?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, "Well, go record episode 1, send it to me. I'll let you know if you sound stupid." So he sends it to me, and he had written out this story. And I said, "This is a great story." I go, "But it's obvious that you are reading it to me and nobody wants to listen, that whole 9 yards." And he's like, "Oh, okay." I go, "You don't have to be obnoxious radio guy." I go, "But add a little voice inflection, try it again." So he sends it back to me and I go, "This is so much better." I said, "It's only because I'm listening for it that I can tell you're kind of reading this." I said, "But you could put this out. This is so much better." And he goes, "Wait, hold on." Went back and recorded it again. And I go, "This is amazing. I can't even tell you're reading it." He goes, "I'm not. I know the story now." And I was like, "Well, maybe that's your workflow." And so he started it, launched it, and here again, the community came. So he's interviewing other pilots, and you have, especially when you get into any kind of armed forces, they all have their own jargon. Oh, you had to fill out the J39 and then the KP-27. And I have no idea what they're talking about, but they do. And that was the thing he said, because his business was you could send him a picture of your plane and he would make this big, huge thing to hang on your wall of your plane. And he goes, "That's definitely, working." And he goes, "That part's great." He goes, "But the thing I didn't realize was how much I missed being around other pilots." And he said, some of these pilots, they've never talked about these stories. So it was all sorts of benefits on that. But that's, again, the one that always seems to trip us up is the mental stuff. I always laugh. There's a documentary on Netflix where Garth Brooks is playing New York City, and he's like, "I'm a country boy in the big city. Nobody's going to want to listen to me." And at one point, his tour manager comes in and said, you know, "Garth, I got to tell you something." And Garth's like, "There ain't nobody there, is there?" And he's like, "No, Garth." He goes, "There's 825,000 people out there." And Garth goes, "Wait, you're telling me there's 825,000 people out there?" And he goes, "No, Garth, I'm telling you there are 825,000 people there 20 minutes ago." And Garth is like, "Holy cow." By the time he hit the stage, there were almost 1 million people. But Garth Brooks he was in his hotel, all his drapes were drawn, didn't even want to look, absolutely convinced nobody would listen to him. And so, if nobody listens to you, then no harm, no foul, right? You don't look, who cares? You've got the skills to make a podcast, and you've got a great story about that time you started a podcast. But I'm here to tell you, people will listen to you.
So I want to turn now to not exactly a lightning round, but maybe a quick fire round into five
Sure.
quick questions. So, what's the favorite podcast you have ever recorded?
The one that I've recorded would be probably episode 400 of the School of Podcasting. And it was super creative because it was a kind of a milestone episode. I decided to do a skit. And in the episode, I get taken over by a crazy morning zoo crew called Binky and the Wiz. And they lock me in a closet. And I have a lot of people that are like, "Hey, when is Binky and the Wiz coming back?" And I'm like, "Well, that was like 600 episodes ago." But that's one that was pretty entertaining. I do a lot of them on the milestones, episode 900. So if you go to either schoolofpodcasting.com/400 for Binky and the Wiz, or you can go to schoolofpodcasting.com/900 where I interviewed Jesus. And that was fun because I figured I'd be pushing people's buttons, but it was fun just because he was talking about the family business and how he was taking it over from his dad. And I just come back from a religious podcast conference, so I was kind of in a religious mood, and that was just fun, just to go right on the edge of not offending anybody, but yet being entertaining and yet still talking about podcasting. So those are probably two that I've had a lot of people go, that was pretty cool, which is great, except you want them to say stuff like that about your regular stuff too, which I do. I got a lot of comments on the marriage one. So I think anytime you can kind of surprise your audience with something that's a little different, but still delivering value, they're really appreciative of it.
How about a tool that you're currently working with you could give a shout out to or recommend?
Yeah, I love the one I just held up. The Zoom PodTrack P4 is this thing. It slices, it dices, it even juliennes. I mean, if you want to record your podcast out in the woods, it runs on batteries. It really does anything you want. So that's probably the most, in terms of equipment that I recommend, that's probably the one I recommend the most.
How about a current podcast you're enjoying?
I really love the No Agenda Show with Adam Curry, who, if you're old enough, you have gray hair like me. Yes, the guy from MTV, who also is the co-inventor of podcasting. He does a show with a guy named John C. Dvorak called No Agenda, and they pick apart the media, and it's amazing. They try to stay pretty neutral, and it's interesting because the news cycle doesn't really remember what they did 3 weeks ago. But Adam does. So when they say something that's contrary to what they did 3 weeks ago, he's like, hey, didn't you guys say this last week? So they kind of pick apart the media. And I love it. It's a good show.
Other than your book, you got a book you could recommend to us?
Yeah, probably this one. It's by Tom Webster. It's called The Audience is Listening, a little guide to building a big podcast. And number one, Tom is pretty funny, a little snarky, so it's not dry, which I love. And it really goes through a lot of the stuff I teach at the School of Podcasting, really figuring out who your audience is and what they want. And so the core of that is building a survey. And I always tell people, I'm like, read this and do what's in the book, because, you might be putting out a podcast that you think is great, and then it turns out you're feeding, meat to vegans, and they're like, no, I don't want this. So this is a great way to find out what's working.
How about the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Yeah, that came when I was in high school, and I had a teacher that I had worked at a grocery store, and nobody believes this, but I'm here to tell you, I was painfully shy as a kid, and I got a job in a grocery store, and I got fired because I was so shy I wouldn't talk to the customers. And so I got this job through my high school, and so the teacher of this kind of business class I was taking pulled me aside and said, you've got to be more like your best friend. Well, my best friend was, monkey hour all the time, super outgoing. And I said, I just can't do that. And so he said, here's what I want you to do. He goes, I want you to act the way you want to be, and someday you will be the way you act. Now, today we call that fake it till you make it, but that's what it was. And so I just started pretending I was outgoing. And eventually I just saw that, nobody's going to punch you in the face. And, I was able to just get more comfortable at it. That's still in me. When I was in Chicago, I went to this event primarily because it was about podcasting, but also I didn't know a soul there. And I was like, well, if nothing else, I'm going to grow my network by speaking at this event. But when I got there was a part of me that was wanted to kind of revert back into my shell. And I was like, nope, all you got to do is walk up to somebody and go, what brings you to the show? So that's the one that it really did change my life.
So, Dave, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if anyone wanted to connect with you, find out more about Podpage, or check you guys out. What would be the best place or places for them to go?
Yeah, Podpage is easy. Just go over to podpage.com. If you want to preview what your website would look like, just go to podpage.com/preview, and you could play with Podpage for 14 days. We don't even need a credit card. And if you want more about the School of Podcasting, just go over to schoolofpodcasting.com, and my contact information is right there at the top.
Well, Dave, this has been a true pleasure for me. I hope we can continue this conversation.
Oh, Tom, thanks so much. This has been a blast.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day, one actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network, available wherever you listen to podcasts.